The US just released Dietary Guidelines for 2026. It's very different from what we have been told for years. But the real question is, should we follow them? If you're confused, you're not alone. Today I'm breaking down the new 2026 Dietary Guidelines, how they compare against the old guidelines, and how they both stack up against the Mediterranean diet, one of the most researched dietary patterns in the world. I'm Dr. Priyal, a physician trained in culinary medicine. And here on this channel, FitFab with Food, I help make nutrition realistic, sustainable, and practical. Dietary guidelines matter because they influence hospitals, school meals, food programs, and how many people think they should be eating. But here's the key thing to remember. These guidelines are written for general population, not for personalized nutrition. And that's where a lot of confusion comes from. Let's start with the previous guidelines from 2020 to 2025. They were based on my plate model. Half the plate fruits and veggies, quarter whole grains, quarter lean protein, and mostly low fat or fat free dairy. There was a strong emphasis on limiting saturated fat, limiting added sugar to less than 10% of the total calories, and there was a specific alcohol limitation amount. This approach was fairly planned, forward, and conservative, and for many people it worked pretty well. Now here's where things change. The new 2026 dietary guidelines represent one of the biggest shifts we've seen in decades. First, there is much stronger emphasis on protein. Protein is now prioritized more than ever, especially as we age. Second, full-fat dairy is no longer discouraged. As long as it is unsweetened, it is considered acceptable. Third, these guidelines take much stronger stance against ultra-processed foods and added sugars. The message is clear. There is no healthy amount of added sugar. Fourth, alcohol guidance has changed. So instead of daily specific limits, now the advice is less is better for your health. And finally, the whole grains are still included, but they are no longer the star of the plate. This shift reflects growing concerns about muscle loss, insulin resistance, and metabolic health, especially as we get older. But it has also created confusion. These guidelines are not saying vegetables don't matter. These guidelines are not saying carbohydrates are bad. But when people hear more protein without the context, they may interpret it in a different ways which are not ideal. The Mediterranean diet is not a government guideline. It is a traditional eating pattern that has been studied for decades. It emphasizes vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and olive oil. Protein comes mainly from fish, beans, and lentils, and with small amount from poultry, dairy, and red meat. Ultra-processed foods and added sugars are naturally minimal. Most importantly, it is enjoyable, sustainable, and culturally rooted. This way of eating is consistently associated with lower risk of diabetes, heart disease, and overall mortality. It's one of the strongest dietary patterns we have evidence for. When you compare all three approaches, something interesting shows up. The new guidelines are trying to fix the real problems: too much sugar and processed foods. But the Mediterranean diet already avoids those issues naturally. It emphasizes whole foods, adequate protein, healthy fats, and enjoyment without any rigid rules. As a culinary medicine physician, this is what I recommend. Use the Mediterranean diet as your foundation. Make sure you're getting enough protein at each meal, mainly from plants. Include whole grains as tolerated and don't fear healthy fats. And minimize the ultra-processed foods as much as realistically possible. Nutrition guidelines will keep changing, but the basics don't. The healthiest way to eat is the one you can enjoy, cook at home, and sustain long term. If this helped clarify things for you, please give this video a like. Comment below and tell me, do you trust food guidelines or do they confuse you? Subscribe to FitFab with Food for practical, evidence-based nutrition you can actually use.